So maybe you're trying to get ahead in life and you feel like your priorities aren't where they should be. Well, my name is Marcus. This is Discover Ignite, where we discover possibilities and ignite change. And here at Discover Ignite, what I like to do is give you guys some tips and tricks and some advice to help you guys grow and become a better version of yourself. Now, if that sounds like something you're interested in, remember to subscribe and to like this video if you do enjoy this video. Now, your priorities, right? Where are they essentially sitting at, right? Now, let me give you a little bit of story, a little bit of my backstory. A lot of times I felt like in my life, my priorities, especially in my young 20s, were not where they were supposed to be, right? Like I was going into my 20s, straight out of high school, like, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm going to go to college, I'm gonna get this done, that done. You know, I want to get that perfect job and I'm just going to ride it out, right? I'll be good. Once I get that perfect job, I'm going to ride it out. That's going to be life. And, you know, coming out of that, it didn't quite work that way, right? My priorities shifted. I ended up joining the military. My priorities shifted to partying and do a bunch of stuff that I felt was wasted, right? Because I wanted to go to college. I wanted to do all these other different things. And my priority shifted, right? It shifted to partying, right? Enjoying the moment, which I must say, at the time, the priorities, you know, I look back on it and it's easy to say, you know, I would correct it, but ultimately, you know, I think things happen for a reason. But what you ultimately want to do, right, is to find your priorities, right? Now, growing out of that stage, I eventually got to a time in my life where I didn't want that anymore, right? I didn't want that party life, and I still had a lot of friends and everybody that wanted to go out and party all the time, and I felt like I had to put an end to it. And today, that's exactly what I want to talk about, how you can put an end to it, how you can put an end to, you know, not setting those things, those achievements you want in life, right? Making that a priority, but how exactly can you do that? And I want to start with you actually looking at your week, right? What in your week is the priority? If you essentially document your week, right? What do you look forward to each and every day? Or perhaps there's a specific day in which you are really excited about, right? Maybe you work during the week and you don't really enjoy that, right? But at the weekend, there's one particular thing that you really, really enjoy, right? And you want that to be the priority, that you want that one thing to essentially guide you to, you know, make your life better, right? Maybe you like to, you know, make YouTube videos, and maybe you like to write, or maybe you like to, you know, you just want to get healthy, right? Or you want to set a priority for those specific things, but you find like you are not really doing that. Perhaps something else in your life is essentially pulling you, right? Now, relating back to my old story, right? I enjoy partying. Essentially on the weekend, that's what my priority was. Now, I wanted to go back to college. I wanted to do all these things, but that was a priority, right? And at the time, I made it priority, right? I moved everything else out that I felt I wanted to do. I put that on the back burner, and that set priority, right? Because ultimately, I wanted to, you know, just go out and enjoy myself, right? I was young, I was 20s, I was experiencing life and around the world, right? And so ultimately, you have to find what it is during your week. What is really taking a priority? What are you ultimately doing, right? And a lot of times you don't really notice this until you start really looking at your environment. An environment I was in was very much a priority to party, right? Everybody around me enjoyed it. I enjoyed it for a while, and you have to look at those things, right? And you have to realize that that is what you're essentially setting as the precedence, right? That's going to essentially dictate everything else. So all those other things will be placed on the back burner because ultimately you just want to have fun, or whatever the case is, right? It may not be partying, it may be something else, right? You may have something else in your life that you prioritize, right? Maybe you prioritize, you know, going to the movies, or prioritize, you know, reading books or something like that. Not that that's a bad thing, but maybe there's something else in life that you are prioritizing that is essentially pulling you away from a goal. And ultimately, you know, there may be some kind of achievement you want in life that will take a lot of time and effort. So you want to start looking at whatever it is that is taking your time by essentially auditing your week, and then looking at whatever that other implementation you want, right? The achievement you want in life. That one thing that when you're 80 years old, you're like, man, you know what? I set a time for this thing and I made it happen, right? I was able to make it happen and because I set priorities. But to do that, you have to find out where your priorities are now, because a lot of times we may think there's those things that we want, but our priorities are essentially guiding us to something else, right? Our actions are essentially showing us where our priorities are at. So that's ultimately what you have to do. When you audit that and realize where it's at, say, okay, that's fine, right? That's what it is now. But if you really want to change and make that goal or achievement happen, what you need to do is start finding the one thing, right? And making the time for that thing to essentially wind out, right? So your priorities essentially shift without you being so blatant about it, right? Because a lot of times there may be things we want to shift our priorities to, but it is hard to do that because, again, we have other things. Like for me, it was partying back then, and that took up a lot of my time, and I didn't make time for college and all that stuff, right? I didn't make time until I set aside time, and that's ultimately what we're going to, right? Now that you know where exactly your priorities are at, I mean, you may know right off the bat. I can ask you this question and be like, yeah, well, my priorities are right there just as long with you, right, in that party stage. But I really want to achieve this thing, but how do I achieve this thing? And so to essentially shift your priorities, your values, you have to incorporate that one thing, right? You're gonna have to build a habit in which you're actually, you know, doing that one thing on a daily basis, right? Now, for me, to say I wanted to go to college, because that's ultimately what I wanted to do, right? And so to understand that for me to shift priorities for college, right, I had to enroll, right? I essentially had to force myself. I had to take that action and force myself to start going. So I signed up for a class, right? And I started doing classes. And then I realized by doing this, right, by setting that priority and doing this, I slowly started pulling myself out of the desire to make partying a priority for me, right? Because I was realizing that when I was partying, you know, I'd come back and recoup and everything, and it would waste a lot of time. And that took away from the time that I was able to actually study, right? Because at the time when I started out small. And that's ultimately what you want to do, is start out something small. Because if you essentially try to shift your priorities from one thing to the next, unless it's some dramatic change in your life or event that has occurred, it's going to be hard to try to do that. So you want to start with something small like I did, right? I started with one class, and then I was realizing that, man, if I didn't go out and party so much, I can actually put more effort into school, right? I could do more than just one class. I can do a couple classes, and then that would essentially cut down the time on me going through college. And so that's ultimately what I did, is I took that one class, and ultimately I started naturally drifting more towards this, right? Like that was a priority, and my environment made everything that priority. And then I slowly started to realize, well, you know, that's great, but where is that going to get me down the road, right? You start looking, your perspective slowly shifts, your priorities and your values slowly shift into that one thing, right? Because you're like, man, I'm wasting time over here, right? And all what I thought was, you know, where my values were at, where my priorities are at, were over here. But when in fact, you know, I could do so much more, and I would be so much better ahead in life, right? By shifting my priorities to this thing and concentrating on this thing. And in doing so, right, I started going out less. Right, I'd go out every now and again and occasionally, but then my priority shifted to school, and that took a big chunk of my time, and I started enjoying it, right? Because I started enjoying the fact that I was getting ahead, I was getting more knowledgeable about things, I was going after that goal that I wanted, you know, I was making that priority. But it took me initially to take that step, right? To take that little step, to take that one class. When I started taking that one class, I realized that, hey, you know, if I do this and I continue this, I could achieve, you know, my bachelor's eventually, right? That's ultimately what I was trying to do. And I had waited for so long, and set my priorities were always different, right? So it's essentially taking that first action and incorporating something into your life. And you realize, you get this perspective shift that, hey, you know, this is really where I want to be, right? I really enjoy what I'm doing. And it's not just to deal with school, right? Because a school is a whole other different topic. It's about anything in life. Perhaps you're trying to do, you know, incorporate better healthy habits in your life, and you want to start out small, right? Don't just rip yourself out of there. Priority is, you know, it's pizza every Friday or every other Friday. Friday night, it's pizza night or something like that, you know, and slowly incorporate that, slowly change that, maybe every other Friday, right? Or change it up and start eating something healthy. And then you realize that, man, I've actually eaten healthy for a while, and I feel like every time I eat that pizza, right, it takes away from all the hard work I've put into it. And so you start getting a perspective shift, and then you start realizing, well, maybe I should throw, you know, essentially more tallies in this box as opposed to this box, because this box really isn't serving me, right? And ultimately, you know, your priorities completely shift because you see the benefit in this. And originally, you know, you were so concerned about what you would actually lose in this category, right? Which is, you know, the fun, the party, and all that stuff. But when you come back over here, you know, you realize that, man, I have an education, I have all these things that can essentially make my life better. And so that's ultimately what you want to do, is incorporate that one small thing. And when you do that, when you take the action to start doing that, you realize that it starts taking more priority, and you essentially drift more towards that, right? And the more of the choices that you make will be on that side that favors that side, and you realize that you will accomplish whatever that goal is because you made that priority by slowly implementing that action that allowed you to see the perspective, right? To see really what it was doing, because ultimately you can talk about it, but if you're not doing it, doing a small action like that, then you won't really see the perspective, right? You won't see what the hard work brings you, right? Because once you start seeing that, then it doesn't seem like hard work anymore. It's like, man, you start liking that feeling, right? And you start doing it more because of that fact, because you realize that, hey, again, my priorities were messed up right then, right? And you may not see that now. You may be like, it's whatever, you know, that I enjoy what I'm doing. Well, that's fine, right? But if you're trying to shift and achieve goals or something in your life, you need to realize that, right? See where your priorities are truly at, and then slowly implement that thing, and then you realize that your priorities will shift, right? And then you'll start doing that. You'll start achieving those goals that you ultimately want to do. So that's what it's ultimately about, is just shifting your mindset and setting yourself up for success, right? To do that, to set yourself up for success in whatever avenue you're trying to go down, it's ultimately just doing that, right? Setting that small action that's going to essentially force you to do whatever that thing is on a regular, consistent basis, right? And then when you start doing it and doing the hard work in small increments, you realize that, man, this is where it's at, right? Like, this isn't my priority more. Like, this means more to me because I've put hard work in this, and this is getting me ahead, right, in my life, and I'm growing and I'm enjoying and I'm challenging myself, as opposed to this thing over here that's not doing any of that, right? And yes, it's okay to go back and do that every once in a while, right? But ultimately, this being shifted from your priority number one to this thing that's a more positive outlet that's allowing you to do more, get ahead, grow, is setting the priority. So if you guys enjoyed this video, remember to hit that like button on the way out. Until next time, I will see you guys later.